This is Relationship Truth Unfiltered, a podcast that ditches destructive traditions and delves into real biblical teaching about relationships. Welcome, I am Julie Sedenko here with a very special guest from Australia. Amanda is the mother of 3 kids and has been married for almost 14 years. Unfortunately, she has been separated for the last 3. Most recently, she's been walking a tightrope when it comes to mothering kids in the middle of a separation. I wanted her to share her story with you today because I really believe that there are elements of it that you will be able to relate to. Some of the thinking, some of the fears, some of the shame even of her situation. And I want you to hear how she's gotten help, how she worked through that, and where she's at today. Amanda, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Amanda, give us a little bit of an idea of when in your marriage you knew that things weren't right and what was going on.
Sure. Like during the marriage, I had difficulty, and I've got language for it now after joining Conquer and getting help, but I had difficulty understanding the difference between difficulties in marriage, which we had and everyone has, and then the point where I felt that what was happening was destructive, which again, now I've got the language for that. But married in 2010, I think it was sort of really 10 years later that I started to be really questioning and wondering what was happening after sort of trying to twist and bend in many different ways or reach out for help and take advice where I could in relation to the marriage. But I would say in 2020, I was really doing some deep searching, and just things were like, this is not right. Something's not right. And so it was during that COVID period. By that time, we had 9-year-old, 7-year-old, and a 2-year-old. So life was busy. We had a lot of commitments in work and in the community. But I was just starting to really understand at that point that something was feeling wrong within myself. I was running out of things and options and had tried many things, I felt, at that point.
Give me an idea, some examples of what exactly was going on that you knew felt wrong.
When we were having like disagreements or arguments, there was a lot of explanations that I had to do in relation to things I hadn't said or things I hadn't done. And so I was becoming aware that things were being said about me and the children were present and were within earshot. So things like, you could never be pleased, or you're like a princess. It doesn't matter what I do, you're never going to be happy. And then trying to respond to statements like that, or trying to just defend yourself or myself constantly in those times. I was conscious at that time too. There was a period previously in the relationship that just kept coming up, and it was from about at that point about 6 years prior, and it used to be referred to all the time and was used to tell me that I was an absent mother. I just couldn't get past this accusation that I was an absent mother.
Why would he call you that?
I think he was referring to a particular point in time when we had 2 children at that time, and we had both been working. And so shortly after the birth of our daughter, I had picked up some casual work. And so I was still breastfeeding. It was in the evenings. He would come home and I would have dinner ready and get stuff, but then I would go to work. It was certainly like a difficult time. It was a transition where we had moved between towns and that sort of thing. And so it just kept coming up, that period that I'd worked these night shifts for hours. And so around like 2020, 2021, I was a little bit overhearing that, and I knew at that point in time as well that I hadn't worked this night shift for hours, but I was starting to doubt myself. So all the things that were being said about me was causing me to doubt myself. And so I had reached out to the employer that I was working for at that time for a transcript. And sure enough, I had worked this position only 12, 13 months, and it wasn't years on end. And I knew that, but that need to try and get some evidence in a sense to justify, hey, this was a mutual agreement during that 12, 13 months when I worked those casual shifts.
And this is because your husband was accusing you of having been absent for years and years and years in the past.
Yeah.
And it wasn't
Yeah.
true. But this wasn't just a one off type of thing. This was something that was happening all the time in a regular, because we all have arguments with our husband, and
Mm.
good Lord, I remember things differently than my husband all the time. But this was more insidious and more of a very frequent pattern. Is that correct?
Yeah. And it wasn't all the time that we were arguing. It was sort of like over the years, these issues, they were never resolved. And so then when it would come up again, then it would be sort of like I would take responsibility. Yep, I did that. But at the same time, it was sort of then things would be going well, and then things would not be going well. And so it came to a head, I think, when he would begin to say things like, "You can never be pleased. I just have to live a life of misery because of the way you are." And so that was difficult for me to do as well, because I don't want to be the cause of anyone's misery or cause anyone to feel like that they're not living a fulfilling life. And so, yeah, that was just a key moment. And so in that 12 months as well, when I did do those casual shifts to support our family, we had a trip, 3 trips overseas, 2 trips, but 3 countries and holidays. And we supported some family with a trip out to meet our new baby, and we supported a family with some surgery that they needed. And so it wasn't in the absence of like, it was very supporting, but it was just the way it was just being portrayed back to me in relation to like it was a mutual agreement, but no, you weren't there. And so that was just an example where I was like, this is in 2020 now that my eyes were sort of really being open to sort of what was happening, that I felt the need that I needed to get evidence. It didn't work having the evidence. Those accusations kept coming. So
That's an important point, Amanda, because I think so many of us get stuck in this trap of, well, I'll prove it to you. And once I tell you and show you, then you'll realize that I'm right. And that's not really what they want, because it's not like if you prove that you're right, that they're suddenly going to say, oh, yes, you are right. Please forgive me. And then they become the man that you really wanted, or the man that God wants them to be. Let's put it that way. That's really not the point, is whether you're right or wrong. It's the point that there's something else going on in them that is causing them to be cruel.
yeah, and in a healthy relationship, I think discussions like that, or reflecting on decisions that you make at certain points, you can recognize, hey, that might not have been the best way that we could have used our time, or that might not have been the wisest thing that we could do. Um, but it was not that. It was like, this is on you. You were absent, and during that time period as well. Like, I have so many just beautiful memories with the kids, as our daughter needed ear surgery twice during that period. Every 3 months she had reviews. I didn't miss it. It was in the city, and so I know that it was an attack on my character. It wasn't true. I know that I was a present mother. I know that I am a present mother. So yeah, that was one example, but this was sort of 6 years after the fact, and hearing that same accusation. Yeah.
And I think it's important for you, and I'm glad that you knew. So sometimes writing those facts down is good for you to refer back to them, because otherwise you start feeling like you're crazy. Like, well, maybe he is right. Maybe I was gone. So the facts are not irrelevant. They are important. I just don't know that if you're dealing with a destructive person, that they really care about those facts. So what
Yeah.
did you do at this point? You started to seek help, correct?
Yeah, not too long after that, I started to seek help. So things in 2020, it was COVID, it was crazy. We lived sort of in an area that had high needs, and it was shut down by the army and that sort of thing. And so at that time were essential workers. And so, but at that time as well, he had commenced some studies, some PhD work. We were working, like I said, and the children were young. He had picked up some stuff at work extra actionally, as well as sort of doing some studies, and then has said, like things were pretty full. And so we had made like commitments to sort of not volunteer, or I had certainly made commitments not to volunteer because things were full. And so there was this time where he picked up some volunteering work at the church. And so when I challenged him on that, hey, you weren't going to volunteer, like our family, we're in a pretty crisis point. Like I was trying different ways to create family time on the weekends, hired cleaners to come in. And his reaction and response to that again was revealing. It was sort of like, this is just your way to control me. And so it was this disconnect between what he said he would do, and then his actions. And then if you brought that up, hey, you mentioned that you weren't going to do this. And that was really a cry for help from me as well, like to try and, like, in the busyness in this season, in that COVID era, to come together to connect as family. And yet it was just like, no, you're just trying to control me. This is what you do. And so that was 2020. At the start of 2021, I think we were on a family holiday and another argument happened. But this time my son ran away. And that was the moment. It's like, this is not okay. So I was seeing the impact on the children. At that time, he was around 8 years old. Yeah. So it was a holiday compound. He managed, to get down the stairs, but it was frightened me enough that I went out and knew I needed help at that time.
And he ran away because he was afraid of the fighting?
He was over the fighting. Yeah. When I reached out for help, he got crueler. There was digs at the fact that I was seeing a social worker, husband's a psychologist, so he was making digs at that, saying, you only need to go 6 times to a psychologist, because I was, committing and going regularly. I went with an overseas option with video conferencing to try and maintain our privacy, being both helpers in the community and in a professional space. And so I was still trying to protect him, but I knew I needed help and I needed support. Not too long into therapy, asking him to do marriage counselling, and his response was, hey, you're just trying to get me to jump through a hoop. And then later on, a couple of months later, he wanted marriage counselling. But by that stage, I was starting to understand a little bit more of the dynamics, and that some of this stuff was not relationship problems per se.
You eventually found Leslie, correct?
I did, yeah. I only found out about Leslie 2 days after I asked him for separation. And so what led to separation about 3 weeks prior in 2021, out here, Father's Day is in September. And so he had taken the older 2 children out for an outing. And, things that year had been difficult. He was busy. He was saying I was going to have to quit his job because of me, or he would have to quit his PhDs because of me. And so I didn't want him to lose his job. I didn't want him to quit his job.
I'm sorry. I'm back up just a second. So you're telling me that he might have lost his job because you were getting help, and that somehow reflected poorly on you with your job?
I think he was just using that to place the blame on me, like all that was happening in the marriage, like he would have to just give up something that was important to him just to keep me happy. And so he was never going to do that.
Because you had some complaints about his job?
Not his job, no. He had work and he had PhD studies, and then he had taken on some extra projects at work, and then he had taken on some extra volunteering. I probably was wanting for him to understand, like, a family of 3, your work and your PhD is probably enough.
And I'm just going to state what everybody listening is thinking right now. When he accused you of being the absentee parent, and yet he's working and doing a PhD and volunteering, and it seems a little hypocritical.
It did, yeah.
The very fact that you were trying to get help was a big step for you, because you had a lot of fear about that. What was some of the fear that you had in going to get help?
Embarrassment, that people would see that, what we portrayed on the outside wasn't reality, that there was difficulties happening in the home. And so, I think we're good at pretending, and I think I was good at pretending that things were okay. And I was used to having a hope note as well that, things will be okay, and just holding spaces. But I was increasingly not okay. And the kids were increasingly not okay. I knew, and I had known for some time, probably about 12 months prior, that I needed to get help, but I had to overcome shame.
You were also afraid that it might impact other people in negative ways, and so that almost made you afraid to get help as well. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, I had been to people in ministry and had been to the church for help, and I had got good advice. I think maybe not based on actually what the issues were in the relationship, but I probably wasn't forthcoming or really understanding of those things as well. And so I had tried, I remember like trying to express my needs or trying to do things that I knew would upset him. I would try and stop doing that. I used to be quite playful, and he didn't like certain ways that I'd come up behind or tickle him, or yeah. So I stopped doing that. So I tried. By this point, I was really tired of words and actions not aligning. So I was mindful that I'm going to change how I do things. I'm not going to use words. I'm going to show up. I'm not going to do things that I know that he might not like. And so I was brave as well, asking for some things in relation to my needs. Like if I feel overwhelmed, like give me a hug, I'd appreciate that. Only to be told that you're too prickly. And so I felt that I was taking that advice that I had received from people in terms of being a better wife.
And isn't that what we find so much is not bad marriage advice at the church,
No.
but maybe people that aren't recognizing that this is a little bit beyond just marriage advice being needed. You also put a lot of expectations on yourself, and that even made it hard to reach out to get help. Talk about that.
I defined, being a good wife or a good Christian wife as you don't say things amiss about your husband. And I certainly didn't do that. But I think that made it more difficult probably for people to understand the issues that I was facing or the things that we were dealing with. And so it wasn't really until it reached that point where you can see the impact on the children that I started to understand that I need to let go of whatever it is that I'm feeling in terms of embarrassment or what the right thing or the wrong thing isn't. This is really impacting the children.
It's very easy to fake it in front of the public, but it's very hard to play pretend 24/7 in front of your kids. They know
Mm,
what's going on. And I think
yes.
they kind of mirror the stress and anxiety and fear that you're feeling inside because they're feeling it too. Would that be an
Yeah.
accurate description?
Yeah, they're feeling it too. And they were braver than I was to put that into words and to express how they were feeling.
And then, two, you were taking the mask off a little bit at home and starting to become a person that you didn't necessarily recognize.
Yeah. I would react in ways that I wasn't proud of. I would react in ways that wasn't part of my nature, that would shock myself. And so, yeah, I was capable, and I called names back. I always felt like I wish that he would just swear at me rather than attack who I was, or rather than attack my identity. It was just like, just let it loose. But it just felt so personal. And so, yeah, I didn't do well many times of stepping out of that situation and not reacting. Yeah. So I had a lot to learn.
How did you feel about yourself in those moments?
Not great. Not a great example either. Felt like a hypocrite in front of the children. So here we were, and I was just mindful of that difference in how we wanted to raise them, and then our own behaviours. And so that's painful for me because I had my own experiences, growing up in Christian church, and God did a healing work in me. And so when I was 17, in the privacy of my own home, His love drew me back in and that sort of thing. But so I was so mindful of what I was disliking and seeing as a young person, and here I was now as an adult, not setting an example for the children. Yeah.
How did you go from this difficult, painful place and find help and get strong?
It was overcoming shame, the first part. The second time, that aha moment in that September period in 2021. So the children had been out. They were having a little bit of difficulty settling that night. So I was in, and my one of the kids was saying, "It feels like separating. I don't know what's going to happen." And I was just assuring him, "Whatever happens, you're loved. It's going to be okay." And so my husband came in and was crying excessively and said to the child, "Mum's been lying to me for 11 years. I made a promise on Jesus Christ that I was not going to leave this marriage. If Mum wants to leave, she can just go." And so it was, my child was in pain. He was like, "Mum, why aren't you saying anything?" And so again, he was like, "This is what Mum does. She just won't say anything." And so I don't know that I've ever felt so helpless in that moment, not knowing how to handle that. But the next morning, I kept him home from school. I rang the principal and said the children need help. So again, I knew I just had to not let any facades matter at that moment. I had to get help for the kids. And so I just tried to speak to him the next morning. That wasn't okay. What happened? And so from there, things escalated again till 3 weeks later. He'd made some promises, and then it was like he wasn't going to follow through unless I agreed to stay and work in the marriage. And at that point, I couldn't make that commitment. Things got worse after separation than I ever anticipated. The children were exposed to them being told that this is Mum's fault. There's no divorces in his family, and that Mum's family's full of divorces, and that so things got worse.
I'm so sorry. At what point did you find Leslie Vernick, and how did you find her?
Yeah, so within weeks of that incident, my sister, who had been working with a ministry in the States, had heard about this ministry, and so I was sharing some things with my sister. It was only about 2 days after separation, and she said, "People are going to be really shocked by this news." And so at that point, it was definitely around just restoring some sanity and some safety around the children. And so she had shared with me about Leslie. She had set it up so that she could support me to get involved in Conquer, and then I would pay her back. So that's how I started with Leslie, just within a few days of that separation date, that Conquer program. Immediately, you get told you got to do some work, and this is, if you're going to be wanting to get out of that pattern of pretending, if you want to detach from the situation, the crazy dance, which at that point it was, and it got crazier the couple of months afterwards. So the timing was perfect because it was giving information that was biblically sound, but it was also helping me to understand what's mine to work on, what's not mine to work on. And it was right timing, or it couldn't come any sooner than it came, having those resources.
You also joined Walking in Core Strength, is that right?
I did, yes. It was like you now at midnight in your time zone. So it was a little bit of a blur, but I knew that I had to get as much help that I had. I knew that my self-esteem and my identity were all feeling like they were in shatters. And so Walking in Core Strength, yeah, I was in like a midnight group. And so it was convenient that was by choice. I was working other times, other kids would have been around, but Walking in Core Strength really helped me to identify my values, and it talked about boundaries, and I had some understanding around that, where as a Christian woman, you think you've got to keep saving, and to the point I couldn't anymore. At that point, I didn't know what was going to happen with the marriage. I still held on to hope. Certainly after the separation, I still held on to a lot of hope. But Walking in Core Strength helped me realize that my values and who I was the exact things that were being targeted in the verbal abuse. So being told that I had no empathy, being told that I wasn't compassionate, being told that I was the most racist person that he knew, being told that the children don't need me and he doesn't need me and I can just go. Walking in Core Strength actually helped me understand my name's Amanda. It means worthy of love, but start to believe that and know that, hey, I am a compassionate person, because it really damaged, was damaging in that, like, professionally, I'm in a caregiving role, and so it was throwing me like this person that I love and trust, and who is really quite well qualified himself, telling me that I don't have sense, or I don't have compassion. And so I was like, oh, who am I even? Am I a fraud? Am I out here helping people? And so that was crucial in my healing, that walking in core strength.
Is your self-esteem and identity in shatters? Have you been so constantly criticized you don't even know how to recognize what's true and what's a lie? Friend, there is a team of coaches and a group of women ready to walk with you into confidence, knowing real truth, and living it out, even in the middle of your destructive relationship. Do what Amanda did. Go to leslievernick.com/strength and get the help you need right now. And your finances at that time were kind of shot, right?
Yeah, it was difficult. It was sort of a lot of the stuff he would twist to that this is a consequence of you leaving the marriage. I've been able to, over the last year, just shut some things down in the time that I have and get some skills around finances, or, learn how to become a better steward. And so it'll take some rebuilding, but I'm confident that I can get skills in areas and I can develop the way God wants me to develop.
How did you come to make the decision that doing this program is worth the money and it's not wrong for me to spend it to get healthy? And then how did you actually come to be able to pay for it?
It was a matter of prioritization. I was battling people's responses around, what are people going to think? You're not going to be a witness to family members who aren't Christian anymore, or your children are going to be accursed as a result of this, and you made vows, you need to stick to them. And so the investment and the choice to do walking in core strength was because I needed that faith-based support. I live in a really small community, and so trying to maintain dignity for my spouse and that as well. Walking in core strength offered me sort of that dignity, but also that privacy. So that time for walking in core strength was around, I need ministry here, as well as strategies that are not just based in people's perception of what they thought was going on or their own experiences, because it hadn't worked up until that point. Yeah. So I appreciated the professionalism and the content in walking in core strength, and that it was biblically based.
Also, your time in Conquer, there was a couple of things that you learned there that you've been able to apply to your life that's been really helpful to you. Can you share those?
The work that I needed to do and the responsibility that I needed to take for my actions, that was really my takeaway from Conquer. And I still look over the course content, but the principles in there from the Bible in relation to being a steward of my own life and being responsible between God and I for my own salvation, has been great for me. Yeah, because I held on to sort of like, from those times when I was involved in ministry or working in the church, that people are looking at me, and that's used a lot, that, we're witnesses and all that sort of thing. And so I had to understand that actually it's God that does the saving. And so I don't have to put that much pressure on myself.
That's so good. Sometimes it's nice to see imperfect Christians out there, right? When you see that everybody looks so perfect, then you feel like you don't belong in the church, and that's quite the opposite. If you could picture us sitting here together with this woman listening, what would you want to say to her? There's some similarities in your story. She's struggling in her marriage. She's feeling like she wants to serve God. She wants to save her marriage. Her kids are hurting, and she's just confused, scared, and alone. And I know you can't solve all those problems, Amanda, but maybe you can just speak to her and say, this is one thing that I've learned, and I want you to hold on to it today. What would you say to her?
What I would say is a message that, I picked up when I made those initial steps is that, what heart are you going to choose? Decisions are often difficult, but there's some hard choices that we can make that will lead towards healing and will lead towards health. And it takes courage. So I would just encourage in in that regard, is that you can sort of show up with your knees shaking, or you can show up and just be in the background, or you can engage in the program or in walking in core strength as much as you can at that time, because I suspect when people are looking at this, that their lives, like mine, were in chaos, and people are hurting, your children or yourself or other family members. Husband's hurting too. I acknowledge that. But what you've been robbed of to this point, it can stop. And so I'll speak a little bit to the benefit as well of these programs and taking the plunge, is that over this difficult journey in the last couple of years, life doesn't stop. And so other challenges will come and people move on. And so you can use your energy to try and get advice from people. I don't know that that's the best way to use the energy and the little time that we have in our circumstances when things hit such a crisis such as this. And so I can look back over the last 2-3 years and know that other things that life has presented for me, my mum has deteriorated significantly with Alzheimer's disease. And so she was placed in a residential facility last year. But through the tools and through the guidance of the coaches in these programs, I can look back and know that I've been able to show up for my parents, and that my children have been able to see we can show up and we can live out our values when difficulties of life still come. And I don't know, without the tools and without the stuff that I learned in Conquer and in Core Strength, or from the support of my therapist, whether I wouldn't have drowned otherwise. And that's not a price that I was willing to pay, or I can now see that, you know what, I have been able to use my skills and my compassion and my desire to help and be there for my parents, and my children have been very much a part of that. And like I said, the alternative of being lost in the chaos for any longer than what had already been the years that had passed, that's the difference of making a brave step like this. It really is. And so there's a long way for me to go. I saw something the other day as well coming through on one of the lives with the coaches about boundaries, something that you do not necessarily say. And I was like, oh, I forgot that. I need that right now. There's just so many gold nuggets. And so sometimes you'll miss them all. Sometimes you'll get one thing, and it's just useful for life. It's useful for outside of the context of destructive relationships. It's useful for work relationships. It's useful for many different areas of life, the content that you'll learn.
I think you bring up such a really important point, in that the information that you learn is something that can be applied way beyond just your marriage. It can be applied to parenting.
Yeah.
It can be applied to your difficult family relationships, to your friendships, and not even difficult ones, but just normal ones where there's sinful people, and you can learn to just be the person that you want to be. Amanda, how are you doing today? Where are you at? And what is happening in your marriage and your life?
I'm in a healthier place. I'm in a season, I think, still of grief. And so sometimes that grief is wrapped up maybe in my mum's diagnosis. And, you know, some things are more socially acceptable to grieve than, we're still separated 2.5 years on, and things are needing to be sorted out in that regard as well. But the kids are in a much better place. They're doing really well. They have a different story to me. I'm mindful of that. They're navigating 2 different houses. So what my week looks like from week to week or fortnight to fortnight, there's some differences there. And so learning how to have, compassion towards them and parent them in this situation, as my husband would be doing the same thing. And so I'm excited about the future. I'm excited to dream again. So I'm excited about the journey ahead. And there's a few things that I know that I still need to work on and I need healing in relation to. And so I look forward to the time that I can do that. And so it's understanding, I guess, that life's busy, but I've been able to do in the times that I have been useful, like I said, getting skills or growing in areas around finances where before I might have dismissed that. That's not my strength. It's sort of now I'm an adult woman and I'm going to look into that stuff and I'm going to grow in those areas. And so last year I ran 10Ks, did a duathlon, And so you can't do it all at the same time. And so as the children's needs change and their extracurricular activities that they're involved in. But I know that the pieces that I've worked on over the last couple of years, that it's leading towards a healthy life and a happy life.
Did you just say you ran a triathlon?
Duathlon, not triathlon. Yeah, and so that was, the kids came and it was, you don't look at what you don't have. So I can't train for that in the time that the kids are away. And so the kids come at that time when I was training for that, and we would go to the dam or we would take the dog, and they're so capable of watching us grow in areas and address things too. And so that was a fun little challenge that we did last year. We've had some beautiful family holidays in Australia over the last couple of years. So yeah, so fortunate, so blessed.
Are you going to stay separated? Are you hoping to reconcile? Are you pursuing a divorce? Where are you at in that, if I can ask?
Yeah, it looks like things are leading towards a divorce at this point.
I'm sorry.
Some behaviours are still persistent. And so when I talked earlier about being called an absent mother, last weekend I got some emails about being an absent mother and how I was an irresponsible parent. And so those things show me that there's some behaviour patterns there that haven't changed. So I'm just accepting a reality. I think that's a conquer thing as well, that we accept reality.
Amanda, is there anything else that you wanted to share?
No, I think that's all. I think, thank you for letting me share the story, and it's allowed me to find my voice again. And I hope that it brings hope to someone who feels like they're a failure as a Christian. You're not. We're all a work in progress, and we're learning to be wise and strong.
Let me say a quick prayer for you, okay?
Okay.
Across so many miles, Lord, across an ocean, I thank you for the ability to meet and talk with Amanda. What an incredible woman that she has endured so much, Lord. And I just ask that you would undergird her now as she goes through this time of grief with her mother, who's here in body but isn't completely here. And it's so difficult, Lord. And she's trying to navigate raising children and working in her marriage. And yet, Lord, she still continues to pursue you, to pursue you, to pursue you. Would you let her know, God, that you've got her through the times that have passed, through the times that are, and through the times that are to come. We just give her to you, Lord. We thank you for her. And I pray, God, for every woman that is listening, that she too, whatever her situation is, would know that you are there with her as well. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in today, everyone. We've covered some incredible insights, and I hope you're feeling inspired to take action in your life. If you're ready to dive deeper into personal growth and break free from those limiting beliefs, then walking in core strength is your next step. Don't let another day go by feeling stuck and overwhelmed. Head over to leslievernick.com/strength and sign up for Walking in Core Strength today. Until next time, may God bless all of your relationships with Him, with yourself, and with others.